Hello, crafty friends. My name is Jessica, and welcome back to my channel. Today, I have a card for you using some products from the Season of Wonder release from Simon Says Stamp. So let's get started. I absolutely fell in love with this Winter Village die set and this textured pine embossing folder. Absolutely gorgeous. So I knew that they would pair really well together. These are just some of the products I'm going to be using today. We're going to be creating a monotone color. We're using this Neenah Craft Desert Cardstock. This is new to my craft room. I can't believe it took me this long to get it, and I'm excited to have it as a part of my craft room. So off camera, I went ahead and die cut this Winter Village 3 times because I'm going to glue them together to make the die cuts more sturdy. Punching out all the little pieces on these die cuts was a little cathartic for me, so I quite enjoyed making sure that all the little windows and the little tidbits were popped out. It sort of feels like paper confetti to me when they're this small and there's so much of them. The other really unique thing about these dies I noticed is they're not individual, they're like one plate. And so that's why I got a lot of the little fences and the trees all in one go, which is really, really nice when you're wanting to layer up these images, that it cuts them all out at once. Now I'm using my Barely Art glue. I've recently discovered this glue and I've quite enjoyed using it. I'm a big Gina K Connect glue user, but I liked the nozzle on this one, and so I've enjoyed being able to play with it and have that really thin droplet of glue added to my projects. Now, I know acrylic blocks aren't supposed to be used for this particular method, but this is what I use mine for. Since owning a Misty, I haven't really found the need to have acrylic blocks. I do use them occasionally for one-off stamping or maybe some layers where I just find it a little bit more cumbersome to use my Misty. But for the most part, I use them to compress the paper in my die cut layering. Now that I have all of the little buildings all layered up, I did decide not to layer up the trees so that I can have that depth of paper when I glue it to my card. So instead, I set the trees aside, and now I'm going to go ahead and work on creating my hills and my little hillscape that I have for the base of the buildings. This is another Simon Says Stamp die. I bought it a long time ago. I don't really use it because I tend to not make scenery cards, but it comes in handy when I don't feel like hand cutting and I want those perfect, nice edges. I also wanted the buildings to glow, so that's why I'm using this tonic Honey Nouveau gold paper. And I went ahead and just thought it would be easiest if I glued the buildings right to the paper, and then I would take my sharp, thin scissors and kind of cut them out once they are adhered. So I went ahead and adhered them all at once and gave them some time to dry, of course using an acrylic block to make sure that that adhesive is really sticking, and then moved on to making my card base just to kind of give them some extra time. This is the first time I've used this scoring tool from Simon Says Stamp, and I absolutely loved it. I am a Teflon bone folder advocate, but I really enjoyed the way that that tool got into the groove and really made a nice deep crease. I cut my own card bases, and sometimes they're a little bit thicker than maybe their other half, and so I always end up trimming just a little bit of them off to ensure that my background is fitting accordingly. And just there you saw me. I was trying to decide if I wanted to make a full Desert Storm panel or if I wanted that white border, and I did go ahead with that white border. So I trimmed it down a quarter of an inch on each side. I busted out my Big Mama foam tape. I love this stuff. The depth of it is really unique, and the fact that it's really thin, so it's a great foam to use when you're not looking for a lot of bulk, but you want to create a little bit of a shadow to show that dimension in between your die cuts like I have here. So that's why I did use my tape runner on that front one, because I didn't want the foam tape to layer all the way up, because I just wanted to create a little bit of a dimension between the hills. And this is just me fiddling. Where did I want to put these hills? Did I want them all the way up? I really wanted to make sure that I saw a lot of those background trees on that panel. And so I ended up deciding that I trimmed it down quite a bit, but then I went ahead and decided that I was going to go ahead and glue it. I got a little indecisive there and decided to do the tape runner. I'm really indecisive when it comes to glue. I feel like I'm not a very good liquid gluer, and I always ends up making my paper warp. And so I try to use as much adhesive tape roller as I can. You did just see me adhere that hill to the wrong side of the panel. So luckily I was able to fix it. And now I'm just lining everything up. Because I cut my own card bases, sometimes my trimmer gets a little bit fuzzy, so that was just me trimming it up and making sure that it had the cleanest line, since we are showing a lot of that card base on the outside of the panel. And now this is my trick when cutting things out like this, when you have a layered die cut on top of another piece of paper, and you don't want to necessarily see that bottom layer. So the trick to doing that is to use your scissors at an angle and kind of cut underneath that first layer. So that first layer would be the white building, and then I'm using my scissors at an angle to kind of offset the trimming of that paper behind the white die cuts. Now, for me, the biggest thing I think is the fussiness that comes with making sure that your card is laid out in the best way. And this is something I spend a lot of time on. I've always had what I consider, and it's probably not even accurate, but I call it my inner feng shui. And there's just something inside of me that tells me when something feels off or maybe when something feels right. And so that's just me using my inner feng shui to kind of determine where I'm going to lay everything, how many trees am I going to layer, which house is going to go on which side, until I find this like inner feeling where I'm like, yes, that's it. And like I said, it's probably not called feng shui, but that's something I've called it my whole life. I've also have this feeling when I'm like at a restaurant and I just know I need to sit on the left side versus the right. It's just this feeling that I get. And so the best thing that I can call it is my inner feng shui, and just making sure that what I'm doing is creating harmony within myself. And that's the best I can explain. So now that I have everything adheres and I'm letting it kind of dry a little bit, it's time for the splatter. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be like, why didn't you splatter this panel before you put it all together? I did this on purpose, whether it makes sense or not. But I wanted to have everything on the panel before I splattered because I wanted it to create that organic splatter on the buildings and in the windows so that it was almost like it was actually snowing in the village. So that's why I did it. Does it have to make sense? It does to me. And that's, I guess, all that matters at the end of the day. But that's why I did. I wanted it to show up on the windows. I wanted it to show up on the hills, and just to give it that extra little depth. Now for a quick little cleanup before I move on to creating the card. Brutus Monroe has the best stamp cleaner. They have, of course, smells that stay year round, but their limited edition seasonal smells are the best. And I just recently picked up the pumpkin donut and the apple pie one, and it's like you're baking in your craft room, and it's all of my favorite things. So since we created dimension with those die cuts and those hills, I decided to just do a simple tape runner on the background just to avoid any more additional dimension, although I love dimension in cards. The bigger the card, the better. And I just decided, since this card was monotone already, that we would just go with a simple sentiment from Simon Says Stamp. I absolutely love these pre-printed sentiments. It makes it so easy just to cut one out, especially with these label die cuts that they also offer, and just pop it on a card. Easy peasy, not a lot of thinking about it, just super simple to complete a card. Now here I am. I'm going to start calling it my inner crafter feng shui, trying to determine where I want to put that sentiment. Do I want to cut it? Do I want to not? And ultimately I decided that I was going to trim it down and then stick it right there underneath the villages. After, of course, some determining. I did go ahead and glue this down, but then I did change my mind, and you'll see that here in a minute. Because we went easy on the dimension in the background, I went ahead and decided that I would pop that up. So you're going to see me change my mind here. I'm looking at it, not enjoying the way and how flat it looks. So I do decide to pull it off and add one of these Darice foam strips to the back just to give it a little bit something extra. And then once I have that adhered to it, I'm happy. I was debated about putting on some jewels and I decided not to. So that's the card for today. Thank you for joining me, and I'm happy to be back on YouTube.